Hello and welcome. My name is Rick Byros, Content Director and President of Innovative Publishing, the parent company of MedTech Intelligence. I'll be your host for today's MedTech Intelligence webinar that is called, Now That the EU MDR Deadline Has Passed, How Do You Sell Your Device Abroad?, which is sponsored by SGS North America. Before we begin, we've got a couple of housekeeping items. You are listening in using GoToWebinar's web-based broadcast system using your computer's speaker system by default, and there is no call-in numbers. If you have problems with the audio, please try to increase your computer's volume. If you continue to have audio issues, it's best to log out and try to reconnect. Today's event will consist of a 45 to 50-minute presentation by our speakers, followed by a Q&A. You'll have the opportunity to submit text questions to today's presenters by typing your questions into the questions panel of the control panel. You may send in your questions at any time during the presentation. We will collect these and address them during the Q&A session after the presentation. There are no handouts for today's webinar, but you will receive an email with the link to the recording in about 48 hours. Let me introduce our presenters for today. Ibim, you want to advance the slide?
Problems again.
While we're working on this, here we go. Our first speaker is Dr. Ibim Tariah, the Technical Director of Medical Devices at SGS North America. Dr. Tariah's European regulatory affairs experience spans over 25 years and includes knowledge of combination products, devices, and incorporating biologics, drugs, and drug biologics together with quality management systems assessment of medical devices. His expertise lies in innovative long-term implantable devices. Gregory Jacobson is our other speaker, who is the Sales Director of Medical Devices for SGS North America. As a senior sales and medical device professional, Greg contributes to strategy, recommends resourcing requirements, and improves sales processes to drive client satisfaction. Greg has many years of experience in the medical device certification industry, where in the last 10 years, he was responsible for managing high-risk device accounts. Welcome, gentlemen. Greg, I'll hand it to you.
Thank you, Rick. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining. I'm Greg Jacobson. I'm the Sales Director for the Medical Device Division at SGS. I've been here about 3 years. I've been involved in MDD since 2007. Today's agenda is going to cover the MDR background. How did we get here? From MDD to MDR to the expiration just having passed, and what happens now? We'll also cover MDSAP and the 5 countries that are participating in that scheme. It's been around for some time, and still Canada, the only one that is requiring it, but we'll talk about the 5 participating countries. We'll talk about the changes to UKCA and that certification for the United Kingdom and the changes from MDD to MDR as well. We'll talk about Swissmedic. We'll talk about regulatory pathways, and we will very much enjoy taking your questions and answers. Please put your questions in the chat, as Rick had said. As we're going through the presentation, I'm going to look through some of the questions, and then at the end, we'll give as much time as we can to review all the questions. Next slide, please. A brief moment about SGS. We are the world's largest testing, inspection, and certification company. We have over 98,000 employees working in the TIC industry. We have over 2,600 locations with expertise across 7 global industry sectors. We provide assistance and expertise with global support and services that cater to all industries. We'll now get into the presentation. Ibim, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Greg. So the background to where we are today goes back to around about October 2022, when the European Commission in their survey showed this slide, which confirmed there were about 24,000 certificates under the MDD and AIMD, and of this, 17,100 were going to expire in 2024. That caused a lot of concern in terms of shortage of devices on the European market. So they could quickly figure out what to do, and that led to the following legal steps, whereby in December 2022, to the Employment, Social Policy, Health and Consumers Affairs Council made a recommendation. The European Commission put together a proposal in January 6th, and Parliament looked at the proposals made and accepted it as a Valentine's present on 14th February 2023. And of course, that proposal was then published in the official journal as EU Regulation 2023/607 on March 20th, 2023, when it came into force. And a summary of a series of surveys conducted by the Union is as follows. And it clearly shows a steady increase in terms of certificates being issued in the EU under the MDR, both QMS and product certificates, and the status of applications and percentage of submissions, as you could see. The thing here is the fact that as at April 2022 and even late 2022, the number of certificates issued under the MDR was only 17%, which clearly raised alarm bells. That has now doubled in February up to February 2024, where we now have total certificates of about 34%. This gives you a snapshot of the journey so far under the MDR, whereby you may recall it came into force in May 2017. The original date of application was May 2026, 2020, but because of COVID was extended by 1 year. Then, as I mentioned just now, we now have this transition timeline extension that came into force March 20th, 2023. The next milestone will be the completion of contract signing by September 2024, after which we'll then go into the end of transitions for various categories. Class 3 custom implantable devices and May 26, 2026. Class 3 and 2B implantables will end December 31st, 2027, and all the other devices December 31st, 2028. So now that that deadline has passed, what? Now what? That's a big question. Now, for the big multinational companies who have affiliates around the world, they probably had a game plan from day one. What about the small to medium-sized enterprises that have typically worked through their EU reps? What are your options? Because everybody needs to grow their business. You may be successful as an organization in the United States, but clearly, if there are other opportunities around the globe, you consider those opportunities as well. And hopefully, what we're doing is just explaining what options there are to manufacturers in the United States, or indeed everywhere in the world. So the first program will be MedTech, the Medical Devices Single Audit Program, which is intended to allow auditing organizations to conduct a single audit of a medical device manufacturing system that will satisfy the requirements of the medical device regulatory authorities. Details of this are shown in the can be obtained in the link provided in orange. But remember, from ISO 13485 clause 1 necessarily coincide with interpretations of the various regulations as it relates to the QMS of that jurisdiction. So the organization needs to understand how the definitions in the ISO standard are interpreted in light of regulatory definitions in the jurisdictions in which the medical devices are to be made available. I think this is so important. This is why 13485 is the foundation, but of course the QMS requirements of the various jurisdictions may differ. So the MedSAP program provides a complete coverage of the requirements of 13485-2016 and also covers the quality management system requirements of each one of the 5 jurisdictions listed here: Canada, Australia, Brazil, Japan, and the USA. In a nutshell, it's a kind of a top-down approach within a risk management framework, whereby there'll be an audit of the management, measurement and analysis and improvement being undertaken by the organization, design and development aspects, of course, production and service provision, including purchasing. There are also supporting processes such as purchasing, device market authorization and facility registration, device adverse events and advisory notices reporting. So the auditing organizations, these are the entities that conduct the QMS assessments for organizations for the MedSAP program, will simultaneously audit the QMS aspects of the regulatory requirements of all 5. Certificates are then issued with the MedSAP logo. Certificate documents all sites of applicants' QMS that have been audited on site, and provision of certification activities between the auditing organization and the applicant is applicable to all related sites covered by scope of the certification. The auditing cycle can be represented as follows, where you have an initial certification audit with various steps as listed. Then in years 1, years 2, and year 3. And as you can see, the organization could be subjected to unannounced audits as well by the regulatory authorities. So initial certification, complete audit of manufacturer's QMS involving stages 1 and 2, and of course recertification in year 3. But remember, there could be special audits by the regulatory authorities, including unannounced audits. In summary, the MedSAP program allows manufacturers with low to medium risk devices access to the following 5 jurisdictions: Canada, USA, Brazil, Australia, and Japan, with a combined population of 733 million. This is significantly more than the US population of about 330 million. If you then add the UK, which is currently an observer under the MedSAP consortium and is actively considering becoming a member, you could then have a population of a market size of about 814 million. For US-based manufacturers, once engaged with a recognized auditing organization, the manufacturer is removed from the FDA inspection schedule. In other words, unless you are naughty or have calls or give calls to the FDA, you will not be seeing FDA anytime soon. Certainly not as you used to see them today. Moving on to the UK, as you will recall, following Brexit, the United Kingdom came up with its own regulatory framework for medical devices, and I'll go through that very quickly. The building to the left of your slide is where the sausage is actually made at the House of Parliament in London. And the process is as follows, very similar to what obtained under the MDD and indeed the MDR, EU MDR. Is your widget a medical device? What is the risk classification of your device? Manufacturer will then select a conformity assessment route. The UKCA will then conduct an assessment, and if everything is in shape, will issue a certification. The manufacturer then signs a declaration of conformity and then affixes UKCA Mark. And of course, there are post-market obligations as well. Now, for class 1 devices, there may not be a notified body involvement. However, if your device is a class 1 sterile or measuring device, then the assessment body's involvement will be limited to the sterility and measuring aspects. And that's essentially the UK regulation. So, the MHRA is the competent authority for the United Kingdom, similar to the FDA. And the process requires that a manufacturer registers their device directly with the MHRA, appoint a UK authorized representative, complies with designated standards. Under the MDD, these same standards were known as harmonized standards. Under UKCA, they're known as designated standards. Manufacturer is then required to appoint a UK responsible person, and then, of course, upon successful conformity assessment, apply the UKCA Mark. So the key aspects of this are as follows. The UKCA Mark logo has to be placed on a medical device to show that that device conforms to the requirements of the UK MDR. And the UK MDR basically is based on 3 main types of medical devices. General medical devices, which will be the mainstream covered under the MDD. Then active implantable medical devices, part 3 of the UK MDR, which were the ones covered under the AIMD, i.e. 90/385/EEC directive. And then, of course, the IVD directive, which is part 4 of the UK MDR. So an identification number of an approved body needs to be below the UKCA Mark if it has been involved in the conformity assessment, similar to what obtained under the MDD and what currently obtains under the MDR. Very, very similar. So the UK earlier this year put together a roadmap. And as I go through this slide, you begin to say, are they talking about an old style, or is it something going to be fresh? We don't know yet. If you look at those 2 London black cabs, if you look at them closely, you see the slight differences. For instance, the grille to their right is a newer design. The headlights are clearly brighter compared to the old one. And I'm just wondering, is this what the UK is going to share with us? Let's see. So in January, they published this roadmap towards the future of regulatory framework for medical devices. In March, MHR put together a webinar that provided a glimpse on the feature of the UK MDR alignment with EU MDR IVDR. I'll pause here for a moment. Alignment, you may be wondering, why then bother creating your own regulatory framework? But then in the next sentence, it talks about also looking into requirements of the IMDRF, International Medical Devices Regulatory Forum. They're going to take elements from these two regimes, as it were, as much as possible, but specific personalization to reflect UK legislation and references. I thought that's interesting. So, in May of 2024, MHRA published a proposal for international recognition of medical devices. That link will take you to the details. So the UK government has been saying the new regime or the new framework will be a rapid, often near automatic sign-off system if those products are already authorized by regulators in select jurisdictions. We need to see the details, because as always, the devil is always in the details. So today, in this policy statement published by the UK, they currently have identified the following countries: Australia, Canada, the EU, and USA, and are in active discussions with Japan. Some of the highlights include the fact that manufacturers have to comply with new PMS requirements under the UK MDR, which is expected to come into force in 2024. Others include compliance with relevant legislation in a CRC. You're wondering now what CRC is. A new terminology they've introduced, apparently borrowed from the IMDRF. CRC stands for Comparable Regulator Country. So Australia, Canada, EU, and USA in this regard are recognized as comparable regulator countries. So the manufacturer would need to comply with relevant legislation in a CRC. In addition, compliance with Great British requirements, appoint a UK responsible person. And some of the exclusions include the following: approvals via a route which relies on equivalence to a predicate. Example, the USA 510K will not be permissible on its own. Again, Class 2B non-wet, well-established technology, and Class 3 medical devices, companion diagnostics, software as a medical device. Also, companion diagnostics and combination products containing medicinal substance not licensed in the UK, and of course, products excluded from the scope of the UK MDR. The link below leads you to where you could find some more details of this policy statement so far. So it is clear that the UK does not like the idea of using an equivalence model to regulate products. We know that MHRA has been studying the USA regulatory regime and advocating for trust in the FDA's review integrity. But my interpretation, or it would appear as though by not willing to accept straight up 510K approvals, they may be willing to accept 510K approvals in addition to some PMS work. So I think watch this space, because there's no doubt about it that this whole framework, proposed policy, continue to evolve over time. If you notice, this document was originally published in May, but has since been updated as at 3rd of July 2024. So for currently CE marked devices, the UK will still accept them according to these timelines, which, if you notice, roughly coincide with what the EU has published. I'll let you mull over this for a while. Essentially, you could see that for under MDD devices, high class, most of them would cease being acceptable in the UK 31st of December 2027. Other devices 30th June 2028. But if you notice, the UK is willing to accept MDR certified devices up until 30th of 2030. That gives everybody enough time, I suppose, to make the necessary transitions in the UK. So in summary, UK conformity assessment, UKCA, based on the directives, i.e. MDD and AIMD, still provide viable pathway to gain access to the European market, generate real-world clinical data, address PMS requirements, which can be leveraged in other jurisdictions, and manufacturers may consider this option in order to obtain earlier regulatory approval and address unmet clinical needs. We'll then switch to the third geography, Switzerland. So Switzerland used to have a mutual recognition agreement with the EU, but both sides could not reach an agreement, and effective May 26, 2021, Switzerland is considered a third country by the EU. That means that manufacturers with prior approvals, i.e. FDA, EU, or UKCA, will now need mandatory registration with Swissmedic. Report adverse incidents to Swissmedic. Medical devices with CE Mark will unilaterally be recognized in Switzerland. However, manufacturers going to Switzerland for the first time must comply with Swissmedic regulations. They must undergo a conformity assessment process to obtain a Swiss market approval. And the conformity assessment process includes evaluation of design, production controls, clinical trials, labeling. This is important because there are 3 official languages in Switzerland, and of course, post-market surveillance. Manufacturers should contact Swissmedic for guidance, specific requirements, and procedures. But if you are a manufacturer from outside the EU, you must appoint a Swiss authorized rep who's responsible for regulatory compliance and communications with Swissmedic. You need to have a QMS certification per the Swissmedic QMS system. You must have quality management system certified according to Swiss requirements, which are identical to EU's QMS standards. You got to have a Swiss-specific technical documentation for your device. It must be adapted to meet the specific Swiss regulatory requirements, even if the device is already approved elsewhere. The labeling has to be, and packaging must be in at least one of Switzerland's national languages, German, French, and Italian. You got to register your device with Swissmedic before you place on the Swiss market. You've got to be involved. It's mandatory to have vigilance reporting. You must comply with Swiss-specific requirements for reporting incidents, field safety corrective actions, and other vigilance-related activities. You've also got to pay Swiss fees and taxes. Manufacturers must pay the applicable fees and taxes required by Swiss authorities for medical device registration, surveillance, and other regulatory activities. In summary, in the absence of an EU mutual recognition agreement, Switzerland has implemented its own medical device regulations, which, as we've just seen for this high-level presentation, is aligned with the EU MDR. Manufacturers entering Switzerland with FDA, EU, or UKCA approval need to register Swissmedic and report incidents. Manufacturers coming to Switzerland for the first time must undergo a conformity assessment process and comply with Swiss regulations. We're now going to switch gears a little bit and look at, if you may, the business angle a little bit. So I've used one criterion here, gross domestic product. And I have the 7 jurisdictions covered in this presentation: USA, Canada, Brazil, Australia, Japan, UK, and Switzerland. And from this snapshot, you can see that Switzerland has the highest GDP. And remember, GDP is a key economic indicator that measures the total value of goods and services produced within a country's borders over a specific period. It's used to gauge the economic health of a country. So I thought this would be a good indicator to help determine which market you may wish to consider. So Switzerland comes at tops, followed by the United States, then Canada, Australia, UK next. So these are really good markets to go into if somebody was thinking about markets other than the USA. So scenario 1, jurisdictions that recognize FDA or CE Mark approval. This is CE Mark under the MDD. So we're looking at an existing USA manufacturer who's decided not to opt for CE Mark under the MDR. And we know there are quite a few small to medium-sized manufacturers who for now have opted to kind of watch and see how things evolve over time. So assuming you have a 1345/2006 in place, you're going to obtain a MedSAP certificate, which will allow you access to 5 jurisdictions, including the USA. It will allow you access to Switzerland, okay? But for Switzerland, you require a Swiss top-up. Similarly, you can access UK with UKCA Mark. Again, it will require top-up to access the UK. And jurisdictions that recognize UKCA Mark, such as Saudi Arabia. So if you think about it, we started with those 5 jurisdictions. We added the UK, Switzerland, and now if you have UKCA, you may even be able to access a market like Saudi Arabia. Scenario 2, jurisdictions that recognize FDA, UKCA Mark. And we are looking at startup USA manufacturer, low to medium risk devices. It is advisable to obtain 13485/2016 certification, which is often required for worldwide registrations. Obtain a CE Mark certificate in order to allow you, a MedSAP certificate in order to allow you access to those 5 jurisdictions, including the USA. Obtain Swissmedic certification, obtain UKCA Mark. That would also allow you access to other jurisdictions that recognize CE Mark, UKCA. You can then access Switzerland and UK markets, generate revenue early, and PMS data that could be leveraged for other jurisdictions. Scenario 3, we're talking about high-risk USA startup manufacturer. You need to obtain 13485/2016, often required for registrations worldwide. Obtain an MDSAP certificate, comply with QMS requirements of the 5 jurisdictions under the MDSAP program. Obtain product approval from designated third-party review organization. This is interesting Because in some of those 5 jurisdictions that are part of the MDSAP program, such as Japan, the authorities in Japan allow third-party organizations that are designated by them to do product reviews as well. The advantage of this is if you were to engage one such auditing organization, one-stop shop, they could then work with you so that you could get access to those 5 jurisdictions, and in the case of Japan at least, also conduct your product conformity assessment, which I think is a big bonus. Of course, obtain UKCA Mark, because the USA PMA process is significantly much longer. Then this will allow you to generate early revenue, PMS data that could be leveraged in other jurisdictions, access jurisdictions that recognize UKCA, such as now Switzerland and Saudi Arabia. And this provides a summary of those 3 scenarios and what the regulatory requirements will be in each one of those jurisdictions, such as the USA, UK, and Switzerland. That really concludes my presentation for today. At this point, I'll turn it over to Greg.
Okay, Greg, you want to join us too?
Yep, Ibim, I'm here. I've been monitoring the question box, and there doesn't seem to be any. If you like, we can review a couple of questions we've had in the past about combination devices or AI devices or the expiration. But for the moment, no one who has listened today has any questions, except for someone asking if this presentation would be made available.
Right, which I did answer, and it will be. The recording of it is.
Many of the questions we've had in the past revolve around changes to devices and what happens to an extension letter and such, but we've passed the expiration at this point. And so one would not be able to make a material change since the expiration is here. There had been questions in the past about up classification in products. There are a couple of categories of class 1 devices that were exempt from notified body certification that would now be 2A. People have had questions about that in the past. And questions about risk management as well. Where did I just see that? Questions about PMS under combination products for Article 17. This was under.
If I could tackle the one on PMS.
Sure.
The thing is, from May of 2021, the date of application of the MDR, there was only one PMS process in town. If you go back to MDR Article 120, the transitional provisions, it does say that the processes under the directives were now obsoleted, and even products under the MDD that are going to transition to the MDR will now follow the MDR requirements under post-market surveillance. So as it relates to indeed anything that was certified under the MDD, there's now only one sheriff in town, the MDR. And as we now know, MDD's history is no longer part of the law. That's terminated on May 26, 2024. But if anybody has any additional questions, we'll happily take them outside of this webinar.
A while back, we had I've got one more to throw at Ibim regarding QMS. Maybe that will spark a little discussion. A while back, we did a presentation on AI devices and software as a medical device, and there have been questions about what QMS to implement. Would it be 1345 and or ISO 42001? Should companies adopt both?
I would think so, because 1345 is applicable to every medical device manufacturer around the world. But the other standard, I believe, is more specific to AI. So given that that standard exists, there's no way you can pretend it doesn't or ignore it. So you've got to take on board aspects from that standard that help you demonstrate compliance. That'll be my take on that.
Even I have a question for you. As you laid out the different markets as alternatives to the EU market, whether it be the UK or Switzerland, for a US-based small or mid-sized medical device company, is it better to enter one market, like pick one, or is it better to try and do this in parallel with two different markets?
It depends on your bandwidth. What are you looking for? If you're looking for bigger market share, then sure. If you're looking for maybe in addition a higher price point, then maybe both. The reason being that in the UK, it's usually government-funded healthcare system, whereas in Switzerland, a lot of private insurance funding as well. So maybe a mixture of both. It depends on the strategy of the manufacturer, I'd say. I mean, the attraction of the UK is that you are still operating the UK, as I've just demonstrated. The current UK regulatory framework is largely based on the MDD. The delta between the MDD and the current UK MDR, UKCA, is such that it will be quicker to bridge that gap and enable that manufacturer either start selling in the UK or continue to sell in the UK, depending on that situation.
Ibim, slide number 31 talked about population sizes. USA 333 million. Yes. Canada, Brazil, and I believe the EU 400 million. It's not on this slide, but
yes, about 440.
It's okay if we put that together, you know, that's $1 billion and something. There's still several other
1.2 billion.
There's still 6 billion more people on the planet. China,
yes,
$1.5 billion. India over $1 billion.
Yeah.
Okay, so these two countries alone dwarf. Suppose an American company wants to sell in China. Suppose they have a market there for whatever reason. What does company A small or medium-sized company, have to do to sell product X in China?
Yeah, that's a possibility, but I am not familiar with the Chinese regulations. But from what I've heard, they're very, very protective. And I believe that's a very high barrier to entry for non-Chinese companies. And if you don't have, if you don't have an existing ground game or a team there, I think it could be a huge obstacle. I'm not saying it's impossible, but you've got to do your due diligence to figure out what you need to do to kind of get into the Chinese market.
Any idea
Yeah.
about the Indian market?
No. I mean, India, not too long ago, I mean, they came up with their own medical device regulatory framework, which before now had been operating under some kind of old established pharmaceutical framework. But they also quickly realized that devices and pharma are like chalk and cheese. They don't quite mix. So they came up with a regulatory framework for devices. I'm not familiar with those now.
Okay. And Rick, just to be clear,
Again?
we never get requests for these, but since we're talking about other markets here, I thought I'd
Yeah.
throw in the
I
question.
mean, the reason for choosing these 7 jurisdictions was because, to my mind, most notified bodies, most auditing organizations are operating in these jurisdictions. And relative to China and India, I consider that hanging fruits, which is something that the US-based small to medium-sized could quickly, if it may, put together material submissions that will enable them get certifications or approvals in these markets. Yeah.
Okay, well,
Any other?
I don't have any other to ask here. I suppose I could keep going around about other Pacific Rim countries, but that's not our lane
sure.
either.
So,
The interesting thing is that most of those jurisdictions, right, do recognize approvals from the FDA, EU, I guess, UK, and even Swiss. So, if you have any of these, which I consider to be low hanging fruit, it could give you a very quick entry into those Southeast Asia countries too.
I suppose there's regulatory consultants that could help a small, medium company
Sure.
who might find a market there and doesn't know how to get in. A regulatory consultant who knows that market some, could help them with guidance as here's what we're going to do next. Yeah.
Very good. All right, guys. Well, I mean, the presentation was excellent. It was very informative. It gives our audience some options and hopefully some interesting ways of entering into the market. I want to thank you both for putting together the presentation, participating, and underwriting this session from SGS North America. Both presenters actually will be speaking again in 2 weeks on July 31st with MedTech Intelligence next webinar, which is Managing Global Regulatory Strategy and Compliance. It's assessing status, gaps, and needs. This webinar is underwritten by Celligence, and it is reviewing market research that MedTech Intelligence did over the last 3 or 4 months now, that again was underwritten by Celligence, and both Greg and Ibim will be co-presenting on that webinar. Our audience can, if you haven't already registered, go to medtechintelligence.com. It's on the right-hand column, and please register for that webinar. As I do want to remind everyone that we will be sending out a link to the recording of this, and anybody who was unable to attend will also be getting that link as well. That concludes today's webcast. I want to thank everyone for joining us, and again, thank SGS for their support. Have a great rest of the day, everyone. We'll see you next time. Bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.